The Montclair ball was the kind of spectacle that reminded Theron Ashworth, Duke of Ravenmore, precisely why he despised London during the season. Crystal chandeliers dripping with candlelight cast prismatic shadows across marble floors. The suffocating press of 500 bodies perfumed and powdered within an inch of their lives created a fog of competing scents that made his head ache. The endless parade of ambitious mothers steering their daughters into his path, like ships navigating treacherous waters toward a lighthouse made of gold, had grown tiresome before the first dance even concluded. He stood at the edge of the ballroom, champagne untouched in his hand, watching the dance floor with the practiced disinterest of a man who had perfected the art of being present while remaining utterly absent. The orchestra played something fashionable. Couples twirled in prescribed patterns. Somewhere behind him, two matrons discussed his marriage prospects with the subtlety of foghorns. 6 months. It had been 6 months since the engagement announcement. 6 months since he had done what duty required. 6 months since he had watched something precious shatter behind a pair of dark amber eyes and told himself it was necessary. 6 months since he had spoken her name aloud, as if avoiding the syllables could somehow erase her from his memory. Odessa. He did not allow himself to think of her often. It served no purpose. The decision was made. The consequences were his to bear in silence, in the quiet hours of the night when sleep refused to come, in the moments between breaths when her face surfaced unbidden. He had become skilled at pushing her image away, at filling his mind with estate ledgers and parliamentary debates, and anything else that didn't remind him of what he had lost, what he had thrown away. "You look like a man attending his own execution," Lord Fenwick Hale observed, appearing at his elbow with the easy grace of someone who had never been burdened by a title or its crushing expectations. "Smile, Ravenmore. You're frightening the debutantes." "Good. Perhaps they'll leave me alone." "They won't. You're the most eligible bachelor in England, tragically betrothed though you may be. Speaking of which, where is the enchanting Lady Lisette this evening?" Theron's jaw tightened at the mention of his betrothed. Indisposed. A headache, she claimed. A convenient headache, I'd wager. Your betrothed seems to suffer from them frequently, when balls don't suit her particular fancy. Fenwick paused, and something shifted in his expression. Something that looked almost like warning. "You haven't heard, have you?" "Heard what?" But Fenwick didn't answer. His gaze had fixed on the dance floor with an intensity that made Theron turn despite himself, despite his determination to remain detached from whatever social drama was unfolding. The world stopped. Later, he would try to explain it to himself rationally. He would tell himself it was simply surprise, the unexpected appearance of someone he had assumed was still in the countryside, hidden away from society and its whispers. He would tell himself the jolt that went through him was nothing more than the natural shock of seeing a ghost made flesh. But standing there, champagne stem threatening to shatter in his white-knuckled grip, Theron knew the truth with devastating clarity. Odessa Vanthorpe had walked into the Montclair ball, and everything he had buried for 6 months clawed its way back to the surface with savage, merciless force. She was dancing. That was the first coherent thought that penetrated the roaring in his ears. She was dancing a waltz, her body moving with fluid grace through the turns and sweeps, her dark hair caught up in an elaborate arrangement that left the elegant column of her neck exposed, her shoulders bare above a gown of burnished gold that caught the candlelight like living flame. The color made her skin glow, made her eyes appear deeper, made her look like something precious that had been hidden away and was finally being revealed to an undeserving world. She had always been beautiful. He had known that from the first moment he saw her in her family's garden 3 years ago, dirt on her gloves and laughter in her eyes as she tried to rescue a kitten from a rosebush. Her hair had been falling from its pins, Her dress had been simple cotton, and she had been the most captivating creature he had ever encountered. But this was different. This was beauty that had been forged in fire, tempered by pain, polished by something harder than mere prettiness. There was steel in her spine now, confidence in every movement, a self-possession that hadn't existed before. Before, he had destroyed her. She was radiant. She was devastating. And she was dancing in the arms of another man, Lord Caius Merrick. Theron recognized him instantly, and the recognition sent ice through his veins. Second son of the Earl of Drayton, wealthy in his own right from shipping investments that had tripled during the war years. Handsome in that effortless way that made other men resentful and women swoon. Known throughout London as a man of honor, intelligence, and genuine kindness. Everything Theron had proven himself not to be. Merrick held her close, not scandalously so, not improperly, but with the casual intimacy of a man who had the right to hold her, who had perhaps held her many times before in other ballrooms, at other events, during all the months Theron had spent pretending she no longer existed. His hand rested at the curve of her waist with comfortable familiarity. He leaned down to murmur something that made her laugh. She laughed. The sound didn't reach Theron across the crowded ballroom, but he saw it. Saw the way her head tilted back, the graceful arch of her throat. Saw the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, genuine mirth rather than polite performance. Saw the way her whole face transformed with unguarded joy, the kind of joy he had once been privileged enough to witness. She had laughed like that with him once, in the library at Vanthorpe Manor, when he had deliberately misquoted Shakespeare just to see her roll her eyes. In the garden at midnight, when they had escaped her mother's dinner party to count stars and speak of futures neither of them were supposed to want. In his arms, the last time he had held her, when she had whispered that she loved him, and he had been fool enough to believe forever was possible. Now she laughed for another man, and Theron discovered that watching her joy from across a crowded room was a particular kind of torture he had not anticipated and could not defend against. When did she return to London? His voice came out rough, stripped of its usual careful neutrality. Fenwick's response was measured, careful. A fortnight ago. She's been staying with Lady Sibylla Crane. Apparently they became close during her time in Bath. Bath. The word tasted bitter on his tongue. He had not known where she went after the engagement announcement, had told himself he did not care, had forbidden himself from asking, from sending inquiries, from doing anything that might suggest he regretted his choice. The waters were beneficial for her health, according to the gossip, though I suspect the distance from London was the real cure. Fenwick's tone held no accusation, but none was needed. The judgment was implied in every word. She's been attending events with the Cranes, small gatherings mostly, intimate dinners, afternoon teas. This is her first major ball. The music swelled toward its conclusion. On the dance floor, Merrick guided Odessa through the final turn with expert precision, his hand steady at her waist, his attention wholly focused on her face. They stopped, facing each other, and Merrick bowed over her hand with a smile that made Theron want to cross the ballroom and break something, preferably Merrick's perfectly symmetrical jaw. She looks well, Fenwick offered quietly, the words landing like individual blows. Better than well, actually. She looks like a woman who has found her footing again, like someone who has discovered she can survive without the things she thought she needed. Without him. Despite him. Perhaps because she was finally free of him. The thought should have brought relief. He had told himself, in those dark hours when guilt kept him company, that he wanted her to be happy, that his sacrifice had been for her benefit as much as anyone's, that someday she would thank him for setting her free to find someone better. Instead, watching her smile up at Merrick, watching her accept his arm as he escorted her from the dance floor, watching her exist in a world that no longer included Theron Ashworth, He felt something hollow carve itself into his chest. Something that might never heal. The scandal has died down considerably, Fenwick continued, mercifully unaware of the destruction happening inside Theron's carefully constructed composure. Most people have moved on to fresher meat. The consensus seems to be that she was fortunate to escape an unsuitable match before vows were exchanged. An unsuitable match. That was what society had called it. What Theron's grandmother had called it when she had sat him down in her private study and explained, with the cold precision of a general planning a military campaign, exactly why the younger Vanthorpe daughter was an impossible choice for a duke. No fortune of significance, a father whose investments had collapsed spectacularly in full view of polite society. A family name that had once meant something, but now carried the taint of financial ruin and poor judgment. Odessa Vanthorpe brought nothing to an alliance except herself, and a duke could not afford to marry for something so inconsequential as love. Her sister, though, Lisette Vanthorpe, had a modest dowry salvaged through careful manipulation. Lisette was beautiful in a more conventional, more controllable way, polished and proper and perfect for portraits. Lisette would smile and nod and never challenge, never argue, never make him feel alive the way Odessa did simply by existing in the same room. Lisette was suitable. Theron had chosen suitable, had convinced himself it was the same as choosing wisely. Now, watching Odessa accept a glass of champagne from Merrick's hand, watching her touch his arm with easy familiarity, watching her bloom in the warmth of another man's obvious admiration, Theron understood the full weight of his miscalculation. He had given her up to do his duty, and someone else had recognized her worth. Ravenmore. Fenwick's hand closed on his arm with surprising strength. Whatever you're thinking, don't. You're betrothed to her sister. You made your choice 6 months ago. Walking over there and making a scene won't undo it. It will only humiliate her further. I wasn't going to make a scene. You were about to crush that champagne glass into powder. I could see your knuckles turning white from across the room. I know that look, Theron. It's the look you get before doing something monumentally stupid. Theron forced his grip to relax, forced his breathing to steady, forced his expression into something resembling aristocratic indifference. The mask he had worn for so long, it should have felt like a second skin. Tonight, it felt like a cage. Across the ballroom, Odessa had stopped to speak with Lady Sibylla Crane, a sharp-featured woman in her 40s, known for her cutting wit and her complete disdain for society's expectations. Merrick stood beside them, his hand resting at the small of Odessa's back, with casual possession that made Theron's vision blur with something that felt dangerously close to rage. As if sensing the weight of his attention, Odessa turned her head. Their eyes met across the crowded room. For one endless, suspended moment, the ballroom fell away. The music faded to meaningless noise. The press of bodies became irrelevant. There was only her, those dark amber eyes that had haunted his dreams for 6 months, that face he had memorized in stolen moments and forbidden glances. She looked at him, and her expression held nothing. No anger, no grief, no trace of the devastation he had witnessed the last time they stood face to face, when she had called him a coward and walked away with her dignity intact while his shattered on the floor. She looked at him the way one might look at a stranger whose face seemed vaguely familiar but ultimately insignificant, a passing acquaintance, a forgettable encounter. Then she turned back to Merrick, said something that made him laugh, and allowed him to guide her toward the refreshment table without a single backward glance. She had looked right through him, as if he were nothing, as if he had never mattered at all. 6 months earlier, the Vanthorpe library smelled of leather bindings and old paper and the particular warmth of afternoon sunlight filtering through windows that hadn't been properly cleaned in months. Dust motes danced in golden beams, spinning lazy patterns through air that felt thick with unspoken words. It was Odessa's favorite room in the manor, the one place where she could escape her mother's endless lectures about deportment, her sister's pointed comments about proper behavior, the suffocating weight of expectations she had never asked to carry. On this particular afternoon, the library smelled of something else as well. Cedar and citrus, and something darker beneath. Sandalwood, perhaps, or the particular scent of expensive wool warmed by body heat. The scent of him. Theron stood by the window, his back to her, broad shoulders silhouetted against the golden light. He had been standing there for several minutes now, silent since announcing that he needed to speak with her privately. The quiet stretched between them like a held breath, growing more uncomfortable with each passing second. "You're frightening me," Odessa said, attempting lightness despite the dread coiling in her stomach. "You look like a man about to deliver terrible news. Should I sit down? Prepare myself for some great tragedy?" He turned, and she knew. Something was wrong. Something was catastrophically, irreparably wrong. She could see it in the rigid set of his jaw, the muscle ticking beneath the skin. The shadows beneath his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights, of wrestling with demons he hadn't shared. The way he held himself like a man bracing for a blow he knew he deserved. Theron. She crossed the room, reaching for him with hands that suddenly trembled. "Whatever it is, just tell me. We can face it together. That's what we promised each other." He caught her hands before they could touch his face, held them between his own for a moment, his grip too tight, almost painful, his breathing uneven. She felt him memorizing the contact, storing it away like a miser hoarding coins. Then he released her and stepped back, putting deliberate distance between them. "I'm engaged." The words hung in the air, strange and incomprehensible. Odessa heard them clearly enough, but her mind refused to assemble them into meaning. They made no sense. Of course he was engaged. They had spoken of it just last week, quietly planning how he would approach her father, how they would announce their understanding to society, how they would weather the inevitable scandal of a duke choosing a woman so far beneath his station. "I know," she said slowly, confusion wrinkling her brow. "We discussed the timeline. You were going to speak with Papa after the Harrington ball. Has something changed? Do we need to wait longer? Because I can be patient, Theron. I've waited this long." "Odessa," his voice cracked on her name, splitting it into jagged pieces. "I'm engaged to Lisette." The world tilted on its axis. She must have misheard, must have misunderstood, because what he seemed to be saying was impossible. It was the kind of cruel joke someone might play, except Theron had never been cruel, and he certainly never joked about things that mattered. He was serious to a fault, earnest in ways that made society matrons whisper about his lack of humor. "I don't understand." The words came out small, childlike. "My grandmother." He spoke like a man reciting lines he had memorized, flat and mechanical, and utterly devoid of the warmth she had come to expect from him. "She discovered our attachment, our private understanding. She made it clear that a match with you was impossible. Your family's financial situation, the lack of dowry, the scandal it would cause among her circle. She threatened to cut off the estate funds entirely, to destroy what remains of your father's reputation in the business community, to ensure your family never recovered from the ruin. She has the power to do it, Odessa. All of it." Odessa's legs refused to support her. She found the edge of a chair and sank into it, her mind spinning wildly through possibilities, and finding no escape from the cage his words were building around her. And Lisette? The name felt foreign on her tongue, wrong in this context. Her sister, her own sister. How does she factor into this nightmare? She approached my grandmother directly, offered herself as the alternative, before I could even formulate a response to the threats. She has a small dowry set aside, enough to satisfy the appearance of propriety. She's willing to accept terms that... He stopped, swallowed visibly. Terms that you never would have accepted. Terms. As if marriage were a business negotiation. As if love were an inconvenient complication to be managed like a troublesome debt. What terms? It doesn't matter now. It matters to me. Her voice rose, sharp with the first edge of anger piercing through the shock. You're telling me you're marrying my sister instead of me, and I want to know what she offered that I apparently could not. What was I lacking, Theron? What did she promise that I failed to provide? His composure cracked. She saw it happen, saw the guilt and anguish break through the careful mask for one devastating moment before he rebuilt his walls with visible effort. She offered to accept a marriage in name only until an heir is produced. She offered to look the other way regarding any outside arrangements, any private matters I might wish to pursue. She offered to be a duchess who asks nothing except the title itself. He met her eyes, and what she saw there was a man drowning in waters of his own creation. She offered to be everything my grandmother wanted, everything you were too proud, too honest, too alive to ever pretend to be. Odessa laughed. It was an ugly sound, brittle and broken, nothing like the laughter they had shared in happier moments. So, that's what this is. I loved you too much. I wanted too much. I was foolish enough to believe you when you said you wanted the same things. When you spoke of children and growing old together, and building a life that meant something beyond duty. I did want them. I still want them. But want isn't enough when my refusal would destroy your family completely. My grandmother holds the power to ruin everyone I care about. He stepped toward her, then stopped, as if remembering he had forfeited the right to offer comfort. I'm trying to protect you, Odessa, to protect all of you, by marrying my sister, by ensuring your family survives, by preventing the complete destruction she threatened, by giving you the chance to find someone else, someone free of the burdens I carry, someone who can actually give you the life you deserve without strings attached. Odessa rose from the chair, her legs steady now beneath the weight of her fury. Her hands had stopped trembling. Something cold and hard was crystallizing inside her, replacing the soft warmth that had lived there moments before. You're a coward. He flinched, as if she had struck him across the face. You're a coward who has convinced himself that betrayal is nobility, that breaking my heart is somehow an act of protection, that choosing the easy path is the same as choosing the right one. She moved toward the door, unable to bear his presence for another moment without screaming. I hope Lisette makes you very happy. I hope the two of you are perfectly content in your practical, passionless arrangement. I hope you think of me every single day and wonder what might have been. Odessa, please, let me explain further. There are details you don't understand. You've explained enough. She reached the door, paused with her hand on the handle because despite everything, despite the agony ripping through her chest, part of her still hoped, still waited for him to cross the room and pull her into his arms and tell her this was all a terrible mistake, a test of her devotion, anything except what it appeared to be, that he would choose her. He didn't move. I loved you, she said, not turning around, refusing to let him see the tears that had begun to fall. I would have faced anything with you. Poverty, scandal, your grandmother's fury, the whispers of every person in England. I would have fought for us until my last breath. But you didn't want a partner, Theron. You wanted permission. And when the path got difficult, you looked for the first available exit. She opened the door. Odessa. His voice was wrecked, broken in ways she had never heard before. I will regret this for the rest of my life. She finally turned, looked at him one last time. The man she had loved with everything she had. The man she had trusted with her heart and her future. The man who had chosen duty over her and dressed it up as sacrifice. "Good," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "I hope the regret keeps you company on cold nights. I hope it's the last thing you think of before sleep and the first thing you remember upon waking. I hope it haunts you the way this moment will haunt me." She walked out of the library and out of his life. She did not look back. The refreshment table offered champagne, orgeat, lemonade, and a frankly impressive array of pastries that Odessa had no appetite for. She selected a glass of lemonade instead, grateful for something to do with her hands, while her heart threatened to pound its way through her ribcage and escape into the crowded ballroom. He was here. She had known he might be, had prepared herself for the possibility, with the same methodical determination she had applied to everything over the past 6 months, had spent countless hours in Bath rebuilding herself, brick by careful brick, specifically so that this moment, when it inevitably came, would not destroy her again. She had not prepared for the way her body would betray her, the way her pulse would stutter and race at the mere sight of him across a crowded room. The way 6 months of careful healing would threaten to unravel with a single glance, a single moment of eye contact that lasted far too long. "You're holding that glass like you intend to strangle it," Lady Sibylla Crane observed, appearing at her elbow with the timing of a woman who had spent decades reading rooms and the people in them. "I take it you noticed our illustrious Duke of Ravenmore lurking in the shadows like a particularly brooding gargoyle. He's been staring at you since the moment you walked in, you know, quite intensely. I noticed. And how do we feel about this fascinating development?" Odessa took a careful sip of lemonade, using the motion to compose her expression. "We feel nothing. He's betrothed to my sister. His presence at a society ball is hardly surprising or noteworthy." Sibylla's elegant eyebrow arched toward her hairline. "Darling, you forget I've known you for 6 months now. I've seen you cry into your pillow until the feathers went damp. I've heard you scream your fury into the sea at Brighton until your voice went hoarse. I've watched you claw your way back from utter devastation through sheer stubborn refusal to remain broken. Do not insult my intelligence by pretending you feel nothing. What would you have me feel then? Anger? Grief? Some pathetic hope that he might apologize and everything will magically resolve itself? I would have you feel whatever you actually feel, without trying to perform indifference for an audience that isn't paying attention anyway." Odessa set down her glass with more force than necessary, watching the liquid slosh against the crystal sides. "He destroyed me, Sibylla. He looked me in the eyes, told me he loved me, promised me a future, and then chose my sister because she was willing to accept scraps from his table. I spent 3 months unable to get out of bed. 3 more months learning to breathe without feeling like my chest was caving in. I will not give him the satisfaction of seeing that he still has any power over me whatsoever. Even if he does. Especially then." Across the room, the orchestra began another waltz. Couples moved toward the dance floor in a rustle of silk and murmured anticipation. Odessa watched them without really seeing, acutely aware that somewhere in the crowd, Theron was watching her with the same intensity that had once made her feel cherished. Now it made her feel hunted. "Lord Merrick is approaching," Sibylla murmured, something like approval warming her usually sardonic tone. "With considerable determination, I might add. The man is clearly smitten with you. Has been since you met at the Whitmore dinner party. Caius is a friend. Nothing more. Caius, is it? How intimate. How familiar. How convenient. He has been nothing but kind and respectful throughout our acquaintance. How perfectly boring for you. Despite everything, despite the churning emotions threatening to overwhelm her, Odessa felt her lips twitch toward a smile. Not everyone expresses affection through verbal sparring and pointed observations, Sibylla. More's the pity. Ah, Lord Merrick, how delightful to see you again." Caius Merrick arrived with the easy confidence of a man who knew his worth without needing to advertise it through arrogance. His smile reached his warm brown eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that suggested genuine pleasure. His attention fixed on Odessa with open admiration rather than calculating assessment. He was everything Theron was not. Kind where Theron was cold. Open where Theron was guarded. Present and attentive where Theron had always seemed to be fighting some internal battle she wasn't privy to. And he stirred nothing in her beyond mild affection and considerable guilt. She hated herself for it, hated that her heart remained stubbornly fixated on a man who had shattered it, hated that Caius's genuine goodness, his steady warmth, his uncomplicated devotion wasn't enough to make her feel anything beyond friendship. "Miss Vanthorpe." Caius bowed over her hand with practiced elegance. "Might I have the honor of another dance? The orchestra is playing a particularly fine waltz, and I find myself reluctant to surrender your company to others quite yet." Sibylla made a small sound that might have been amusement or might have been exasperation. "How romantic. Odessa, you must accept. I'll be perfectly content observing the chaos from here." "I would be delighted," Odessa said, and if her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, Caius was too polite or too kind to acknowledge it. He led her toward the dance floor. And because the universe had apparently decided this evening should be a masterwork of discomfort, their path took them directly past where Theron stood with Fenwick. She could have avoided it, could have steered Caius toward a different route through the crowd. But something defiant flared in her chest, some desperate need to prove that she could face this man and survive, that she was no longer the broken creature who had fled London 6 months ago. So she walked straight toward him. Their eyes met when she was 5 feet away. Theron's expression was carefully blank, the aristocratic mask she had once teased him about firmly in place. But she had loved him long enough to read the tension beneath the surface, the way his shoulders had tightened almost imperceptibly, the slight flare of his nostrils, the muscle jumping in his clenched jaw. Good. Let him suffer. Let him see what he had discarded. "Your Grace." She curtsied with perfect propriety, exactly as if he were any other acquaintance, any other forgettable lord, at any other forgettable ball. "How pleasant to see you this evening." Pleasant. The word tasted like ash and vindication. "Miss Vanthorpe." His voice came out rough, strained. He cleared his throat with visible effort. "You look well." "Very well." "Thank you. Bath was restorative. I highly recommend it for those recovering from disappointments." She tilted her head slightly, aware of Caius's hand warm and steady at her back, grounding her. "I trust my sister is enjoying her elevated position? I haven't had the opportunity to call since my return to London." Something flickered in his blue eyes. Pain, perhaps. Or guilt. She hoped it was both. Lisette is adjusting to her new responsibilities as future Duchess. How wonderful for her. Marriage to a duke must be quite demanding. All those expectations to meet. All that propriety to maintain. She smiled, and this time it was genuine, the smile of a woman who had learned to wield courtesy like a sharpened blade. "If you'll excuse us, Lord Merrick has claimed my next dance. I wouldn't want to keep him waiting." She swept past without waiting for a response, her head high, her spine straight, her heart hammering against her ribs with such force she was certain everyone in the ballroom could hear it. Caius led her onto the dance floor, positioned her in his arms with gentle precision, and began to move with the music. She followed his lead automatically, her body remembering the steps, while her mind remained fixed on the man she had just left standing alone. "That was the Duke of Ravenmore," Caius said quietly, his tone neutral but his gaze knowing. "Your sister's betrothed." Yes, He watched you through your entire first dance with me. Every turn, every step. I don't think he looked away once. Odessa's rhythm faltered slightly. Caius steadied her with practiced ease, covering the stumble so smoothly that no observer would have noticed. I hadn't noticed, she lied. Forgive me, but I think you did. His tone held no accusation, only gentle understanding. Miss Vanthorpe, I consider myself a perceptive man. I've noticed your reluctance to discuss your sister's engagement in any detail. I've noticed the way you tense whenever his name arises in conversation. I've noticed that a woman as remarkable as yourself has remained unattached despite considerable interest from eligible gentlemen who would consider themselves fortunate to win your regard. Lord Merrick, Caius, please, I think we've moved past formality. She met his eyes, kind eyes, honest eyes, eyes that deserved better than whatever broken pieces she had to offer. Caius, I'm not certain what you're asking me. I'm not asking anything, not really. I'm simply observing that the Duke of Ravenmore is currently watching us with an expression that suggests he would very much like to challenge me to pistols at dawn. He paused. And I'm wondering if you might tell me why. What history exists between you? Her chest constricted painfully. The waltz continued around them, a swirl of color and movement and glittering candlelight. Somewhere in the crowd, Theron was watching her dance with another man, and she could feel the weight of his attention like a physical touch. We were involved, she said finally, the words escaping before she could reconsider. Before his engagement to my sister. It ended. Badly. I gathered as much. Might I ask how badly? He chose her over me. I left London to recover. And until tonight, I had convinced myself I was completely over it. That he was nothing more than a lesson learned. Caius was quiet for a moment, processing. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful rather than wounded. Are you? Over it? The music swelled toward its crescendo. Across the ballroom, past the blur of dancing couples, Odessa could feel Theron's gaze like heat against her skin, constant and unwavering, and impossible to ignore. I thought I was, she whispered. I desperately wanted to be, but I was wrong. The waltz ended with a flourish from the orchestra. Caius stepped back, bowing over her hand, with the same courteous grace he had shown all evening. Thank you for your honesty, Miss Vanthorpe. It's a rare and valuable quality, one I've always admired in you. He straightened, and something shifted in his expression, something that looked like acceptance rather than defeat. I hope you'll permit me to continue calling on you regardless, perhaps not as a suitor, if that role is not available, but as a friend who genuinely appreciates your company. You're not angry with me? How could I be angry with someone for having a heart that was wounded before we met? I would simply like to be present while it heals, in whatever capacity you'll allow. He smiled gently, though she could see the disappointment he was trying to hide. Besides, watching the Duke of Ravenmore suffer the consequences of his own poor choices has proven remarkably entertaining. I find I'd like to see how this drama unfolds. Despite everything, Odessa laughed. It was small and surprised, but genuine, bubbling up from somewhere she had thought was permanently frozen. And across the ballroom, Theron Ashworth watched her laugh for another man, and something in his carefully controlled expression finally cracked. He began walking toward her. Theron had taken precisely 4 steps toward Odessa when a hand closed around his arm with surprising strength. I wouldn't, Fenwick said, his voice low and urgent. Not here, not like this. You look like a man about to do something catastrophically stupid. Release me. So you can storm across the ballroom and create the scandal of the season? Think, Ravenmore. Think with your head instead of whatever part of you is currently in control. You're betrothed to her sister. Every gossip in London is watching this room. Whatever you're about to do will destroy her reputation, not yours. She's the one who will suffer. The words penetrated the fog of jealousy and longing that had clouded his judgment. Theron stopped, breathed deeply, forced himself to observe the room through the lens of strategy rather than emotion. Fenwick was right. Damn him. A dozen matrons had their opera glasses trained in his direction with undisguised interest. The whispers had already begun, a buzzing undercurrent of speculation rippling outward from where he stood. If he approached Odessa now, with that desperate hunger surely visible on his face, he would confirm every suspicion society harbored about the true nature of his relationship with the younger Vanthorpe sister. He would ruin her. Again. More thoroughly than before. "There you are, Your Grace." The voice came from behind him, sweet as poisoned honey, familiar in all the wrong ways. Theron turned to find Lisette Vanthorpe gliding toward him in a gown of ice-blue silk, her pale blonde hair arranged in elaborate curls that must have taken hours, her smile perfectly calibrated to suggest wifely devotion. "Lisette." He managed to keep his voice neutral despite the revulsion that flickered through him. "I thought you were indisposed this evening. A headache, you said." "I recovered remarkably once I heard the Montclair ball would be so well attended. One mustn't miss the social event of the season over a minor ailment." Her gaze drifted past him, finding her sister across the room with unerring precision. "I see Odessa has returned to London. How terribly unexpected. No one thought to inform me." "You didn't know?" "We don't correspond, I'm afraid. Haven't for months now." Lisette's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her pale eyes, something that made Theron's instincts prickle with warning. Sisters grow apart, you understand, particularly when one of them behaves so dramatically over minor disappointments. Minor disappointments, as if having her heart shattered was an overreaction to a trivial inconvenience, as if Odessa's devastation had been theatrical rather than genuine. "I should greet her," Lisette continued, threading her arm through his with proprietary firmness. "It would look strange if I didn't acknowledge my own sister after such a long separation. Come, Your Grace, let us present a united front." Before Theron could object, before he could find words to refuse, Lisette was steering him across the ballroom with the determination of a general advancing on enemy territory. The crowd parted before them, conversations faltering as they passed. He could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes tracking their progress, marking every detail for later gossip. Odessa saw them coming. He watched her expression shift through several stages in rapid succession. Surprise, wariness, and then, most devastatingly, a careful blankness that revealed nothing at all. The open, expressive face he had loved had become a mask, as impenetrable as his own. She had learned to hide from him, had practiced until her emotions became invisible, until he could no longer read her thoughts in the curve of her lips or the shadows in her eyes. The realization carved something deeper into the wound he had thought couldn't hurt more. "Odessa, darling." Lisette released Theron's arm to embrace her sister with theatrical warmth that fooled no one who was paying attention. "How wonderful to see you. We had absolutely no idea you'd returned from your little retreat." It wasn't a retreat. It was a recovery. Odessa's voice was pleasant, but her eyes remained cool, measuring. Bath has excellent restorative properties for those who have suffered unexpected shocks to their systems. "How fortunate you found healing. You look almost yourself again." Almost. The word was a scalpel, precisely aimed to wound. "And you look exactly as I expected," Odessa replied, without missing a beat. "The role of future Duchess suits you perfectly. All that practice at performance must be paying dividends." The tension between the sisters crackled like lightning-seeking ground. Theron stood paralyzed between them, acutely aware that he was the source of this electricity, the reason these two women who had once been close now regarded each other like opponents across a battlefield. We should have tea this week. Catch up properly. Lisette's tone suggested she would rather drink poison. There's so much to discuss about wedding preparations. I would value your input naturally. You are always the creative one. Naturally. Though I suspect our tastes differ considerably these days. The silence stretched, sharp as broken glass. Then Lady Sibylla appeared at Odessa's side, her expression blandly pleasant, in a way that somehow communicated complete contempt. Miss Vanthorpe, Lord Merrick is asking for you. Something about confirming an arrangement for tomorrow's outing. Relief flickered across Odessa's features before she suppressed it. Of course. If you'll excuse me, Lisette. Your Grace. She curtsied and turned away, allowing Sibylla to guide her toward safety. Merrick materialized to offer his arm, and she took it with a gratitude that made Theron want to howl. Charming man, Lisette observed, watching them go with narrowed eyes. Lord Merrick has been quite attentive to Odessa since her return. The gossips suggest an understanding may be developing between them, perhaps even an engagement by season's end. An understanding. An engagement. The words wrapped around Theron's chest and squeezed until he couldn't breathe. We should circulate, Lisette continued, reclaiming his arm. Lady Montclair will expect us to pay our respects, and I noticed your grandmother watching us with considerable interest earlier. She'll want a full report of the evening's events, I'm sure. She led him away, and Theron followed because he had no choice, because he had made his decision 6 months ago, and now he was bound to its consequences, like a man chained to a sinking ship. But his gaze kept finding Odessa across the crowded room. And every time Merrick made her smile, every time he leaned close to speak privately, every time she touched his arm with easy familiarity, something inside Theron crumbled a little more. The evening ground on with excruciating slowness. He performed his duties mechanically, danced with the appropriate partners, made conversation with the appropriate lords, smiled at the appropriate moments, while feeling nothing except the constant awareness of where she was and who she was with. It was nearly midnight when Lady Montclair announced the final event of the evening, a discussion of an upcoming house party at Ashworth Manor. Theron's attention snapped into sharp focus. Ashworth Manor was his grandmother's estate. The house party Lisette had been planning for weeks, the one she claimed would cement their position in society. Such a delightful gathering it will be, Lady Montclair was saying. 3 weeks in the countryside with the finest company London has to offer. Lady Sibylla, you must convince Miss Vanthorpe to attend. The Dowager Duchess specifically requested her presence. Theron's blood ran cold. Across the room, Odessa had gone very still. Her gaze found his for the first time since their initial confrontation, and he saw his own horror mirrored in her amber eyes. 3 weeks, at his grandmother's estate, with him and Lisette, and no escape. How thoughtful of the Dowager, Sibylla said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent room. I'm certain Odessa would be honored to accept such a gracious invitation. The trap closed around them both with an almost audible snap, and Theron realized his grandmother had orchestrated this entire evening with one purpose in mind: to see exactly how much damage she could still inflict. Ashworth Manor rose from the Devonshire countryside like a monument to centuries of accumulated power and carefully hoarded wealth. Odessa watched it grow larger through the carriage window, its honey-colored stone glowing in the afternoon light, its endless windows reflecting the sky like dozens of watchful eyes tracking her approach. She had heard stories of the estate, of course. Everyone in England had. The Ashworth family had occupied this land since the Norman conquest, building and rebuilding through generations until the current structure emerged. A sprawling masterpiece of classical architecture surrounded by gardens designed to intimidate visitors as much as enchant them. This was what Lisette had traded her sister's happiness to possess. "Magnificent, isn't it?" Sibylla observed from the opposite seat, her tone suggesting she found it anything but. Though I've always found grand country estates rather oppressive myself. All those ancestors glaring down from portraits, silently judging one's posture and moral character. You didn't have to come with me, and miss watching you navigate 3 weeks of close proximity with the man who broke your heart and the sister who helped him do it? Darling, I wouldn't miss this theatrical production for all the scandal sheets in London. Sibylla's expression softened slightly, revealing the genuine affection beneath her sardonic exterior. Besides, someone needs to ensure you don't murder anyone. Or worse, forgive them prematurely. I have no intention of murdering anyone. Not even Lady Lisette? Not even a little? Odessa surprised herself by almost smiling. Tempting, but no. I refuse to give either of them the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. They want me rattled. They want me to make mistakes. I won't give them the pleasure. Such admirable restraint. Personally, I find losing control rather therapeutic in the right circumstances, but I suppose we all have our coping methods. The carriage rolled to a stop before the manor's grand entrance. Footmen in immaculate livery materialized instantly, opening doors and unloading luggage with practiced efficiency that spoke of extensive training and generous wages. Odessa stepped onto the gravel drive, straightening her traveling dress and lifting her chin against the weight of what awaited her inside. She could do this. She had spent 6 months preparing for exactly this kind of confrontation, learning to armor herself in indifference, learning to smile when she wanted to scream, learning to project the image of a woman who had moved beyond her heartbreak rather than merely buried it beneath layers of carefully constructed composure. If this was a battlefield, she would not retreat. She would not surrender. She would fight until she had nothing left. Miss Vanthorpe, Lady Sibylla, welcome to Ashworth Manor. The voice came from the doorway. Odessa turned to find an elderly woman descending the front steps with the regal bearing of someone who had never once questioned her own authority or her right to wield it. Silver hair arranged in an elaborate style that had probably been fashionable during the last century. Black silk dress that somehow managed to appear both mourning and menacing simultaneously. Eyes the exact shade of Theron's blue, cold and assessing. The Dowager Duchess of Ravenmore, the architect of Odessa's destruction. Your Grace. Odessa curtsied deeply, perfectly, exactly as she had been trained. Thank you for including me in your gathering. It was unexpected, but appreciated. Don't thank me yet, girl. I didn't invite you for your pleasure or my own. The Duchess's gaze swept over her with clinical evaluation, examining every detail of her appearance. You look different than the last time I saw you. Less fragile. Less easily broken. Bath agreed with me. I found the waters quite restorative. We shall see how long that restoration lasts. The Duchess turned toward the entrance, clearly expecting them to follow. Come. I'll show you to your rooms myself. We have much to discuss, and I prefer privacy for certain conversations. Odessa exchanged a glance with Sibylla, who raised one eyebrow in silent commentary. Then they followed the Duchess into the manor, crossing the threshold into enemy territory. The interior surpassed even the exterior's grandeur. Marble floors polished to mirror brightness reflected the light from massive chandeliers. Walls lined with paintings that probably cost more than Odessa's family estate had been worth at its peak. Tapestries older than most family trees. Furniture that looked more like museum pieces than functional objects. Every surface proclaimed wealth. Every detail whispered power. Every inch of the place seemed designed to remind visitors of their insignificance. And everywhere, portraits of Ashworth ancestors watched with painted eyes, their expressions suggesting disappointment in anyone audacious enough to walk these halls without the proper bloodline. The Duchess led them up a sweeping staircase, down a corridor lined with more portraits and marble busts, and finally to a suite of rooms that overlooked the estate's famous rose garden. "Lady Sibylla, your rooms are 3 doors down. My housekeeper will show you." The Duchess waited until Sibylla, with obvious reluctance and a warning glance at Odessa, departed. Then she closed the door, leaving herself alone with her prey. "Sit." Odessa sat in an elegant chair by the window, not because she was intimidated, but because choosing one's battles was essential to winning the war, and this particular battle wasn't worth fighting. The Duchess remained standing, positioning herself before the window so that Odessa had to look up at her, backlit by afternoon sun like some avenging angel. "You're wondering why I requested your presence here, why I specifically insisted on your attendance." The thought had crossed my mind repeatedly since receiving the invitation. Because I needed to assess something for myself, something my grandson has made increasingly difficult to determine through observation alone. "And what would that be, Your Grace? Whether you're dangerous?" The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Odessa forced herself not to react, keeping her expression neutral despite the accusation embedded in the Duchess's statement. Dangerous to whom exactly? To this family, to my grandson's engagement, to the careful arrangements I have spent considerable time and political capital constructing. The Duchess moved closer, her gaze sharpening. "You were supposed to disappear, Miss Vanthorpe. Return to obscurity where you belonged. Find some country gentleman to marry and fade into well-deserved irrelevance. Instead, you returned to London draped in gold, dancing with wealthy lords, and my grandson has been utterly useless ever since." Something warm kindled in Odessa's chest. Satisfaction, perhaps, or vindication. "I'm terribly sorry my recovery has proven inconvenient for your plans." "Don't be coy with me, girl. You know exactly what you're doing with your strategic appearances and your carefully chosen escort. The gowns, the public events, the very visible attachment of Lord Merrick. You're proving a point. I'm living my life, Your Grace. The fact that my life happens to intersect with your grandson's social calendar is not my concern or my responsibility." "It is now." The Duchess sat in the chair opposite Odessa, arranging her skirts with deliberate precision. 3 weeks. You will be under this roof for 3 weeks. My grandson cannot seem to function properly in your presence. His betrothed has noticed his distraction and begun making pointed inquiries. If this continues, the entire arrangement will collapse. Perhaps it should. The words escaped before Odessa could stop them. She saw the Duchess's expression flicker with something unexpected, surprise, quickly suppressed, but present nonetheless. "You would enjoy that, wouldn't you? Watching everything I've built crumble because a foolish boy couldn't control his heart. I would enjoy never having to pretend I don't exist. I would enjoy not being treated as a threat simply because your grandson made promises he proved incapable of keeping. I would enjoy being allowed to move forward with my life without constantly being reminded of what I lost." Silence stretched between them, thick and charged. When the Duchess spoke again, her voice held something unexpected, something almost like grudging respect. "You have fire, Miss Vanthorpe, more than I initially realized, more than I gave you credit for." She stood, moving toward the door. "Perhaps these 3 weeks will prove more interesting than I anticipated. Dinner is at 8. Dress appropriately. And Miss Vanthorpe." Odessa looked up. "Whatever happens during your stay, remember this moment. Remember that I am capable of recognizing strength when I see it. I am not entirely the enemy you believe me to be. I am simply protecting my family by whatever means necessary. If you understand that, we may yet find common ground." She departed the room, leaving Odessa alone with the roses and the afternoon light, and the growing certainty that nothing about this house party would unfold as anyone expected. The drawing room buzzed with conversation as guests gathered before dinner on the first evening. Odessa positioned herself near the tall windows, far enough from the main groupings to observe without participating, close enough to the exits to escape if necessary. 20 guests in total, she had counted, nobility ranging from minor barons to influential earls with connections to Parliament. Several unmarried ladies, whose mothers had clearly identified Theron's technically available state as an opportunity despite his public betrothal. A handful of younger sons, whose presence suggested the Duchess was conducting business negotiations alongside social maneuvering, ever the strategist. Lisette held court near the massive fireplace, resplendent in pale pink silk that made her look ethereal and untouchable. Her laugh carried across the room at precisely calibrated intervals, musical and empty. Theron stood beside her like a man attending his own execution, his expression carefully neutral, his gaze fixed somewhere in the middle distance. He hadn't looked at Odessa once since she entered the room. She told herself she was grateful for his restraint. "You must be Miss Vanthorpe, the younger one." The voice came from her left, unexpected. Odessa turned to find a man perhaps 15 years her senior, with silver-threaded dark hair and a face that suggested both sharp intelligence and complete impatience for foolishness. He was dressed impeccably in formal evening attire, his bearing unmistakably military, despite civilian clothes. "I am." "And you are?" "Lord Hadrian Vance. I served with your father in India years ago, before his unfortunate investment troubles brought him home." His gaze assessed her with uncomfortable directness, missing nothing. "I've also known Theron Ashworth since he was a boy barely tall enough to mount a horse, taught him to shoot, to ride, to understand that duty and desire rarely align in convenient ways." Odessa's spine stiffened. "How comprehensive of you." "I'm not known for subtlety, Miss Vanthorpe. I find it wastes valuable time." He positioned himself beside her at the window, his attention ostensibly on the darkening gardens. "I watched you enter this room precisely 7 minutes ago. I watched the way Theron carefully didn't look at you. I watched the way his betrothed noticed him not looking, and her expression curdled beneath that pretty smile she wears like armor. You're an astute observer, then. A concerned one." He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "I care for that young man deeply. His father was my closest friend. Before death, took him from us too early. His grandmother, despite her methods, is a remarkable woman who has sacrificed everything for this family's survival and reputation. And you, Miss Vanthorpe, are threatening to destroy the careful balance that keeps them all functioning. I've done nothing except exist. Sometimes that's more than enough." His expression held no malice, only weary understanding born of long experience. "I know what happened between you and Theron. The whole sordid arrangement, the threats, the coercion. He confessed everything to me in a letter so soaked in whiskey, I'm surprised the words remained legible. He loves you. Possibly has loved you since the moment he met you in that ridiculous garden with dirt on your face. And that love is going to ruin him completely if something doesn't change." Odessa's chest constricted painfully. Then perhaps he should have chosen differently when he had the chance. Perhaps he should have. But he didn't. He made a decision based on information he had at the time, threats that seemed very real and very immediate, and a grandmother who can be terrifyingly convincing when she wants something badly enough. Lord Hadrian's voice softened slightly. "That doesn't excuse the pain he caused you, but it might explain it. Why are you telling me any of this?" "Because 3 weeks is a long time, Miss Vanthorpe. Long enough for old wounds to reopen and bleed fresh. Long enough for careful people to make careless mistakes they'll regret forever. Long enough for everything to collapse if someone doesn't exercise restraint." He paused, holding her gaze. I'm asking you, as someone who has no stake in your personal happiness, but genuine investment in preventing catastrophe, to be cautious. Cautious of what, specifically? Of hope. The word landed like a stone in still water. Hope is dangerous when the circumstances haven't fundamentally changed. Theron is still bound by duty and obligation. His grandmother still holds considerable power over everyone in this family. And your sister. He glanced toward Lisette, who had noticed their conversation and was watching with narrowed eyes. Your sister is far more formidable and more ruthless than anyone gives her credit for. I'm not hoping for anything, Lord Hadrian. I came here because refusing the invitation would have appeared cowardly, and I refuse to be a coward. I intend to survive these 3 weeks with my dignity intact, return to London, and continue building a life that doesn't include your young friend. And if that proves impossible, Odessa met his gaze directly, unflinching. Then I suppose we'll all discover exactly how much catastrophe we can survive. The dinner gong sounded, cutting through conversations and redirecting attention toward the dining room. Guests began pairing off according to the strict hierarchy of precedence, the careful choreography of aristocratic tradition playing out in who escorted whom. Lord Merrick appeared at Odessa's side, offering his arm with a warm smile that felt like sanctuary. May I have the honor? Please. I'd be grateful. They joined the procession toward the dining room, and Odessa was acutely aware of Theron escorting Lisette somewhere behind them. She could feel his attention like heat against her back, constant and unwavering despite his apparent indifference. Lord Hadrian's warning echoed in her mind. Hope is dangerous when the circumstances haven't changed. But as they entered the grand dining room, as candlelight glinted off crystal and silver and ancient family china, as she felt the weight of 24 curious gazes assessing her worth, Odessa realized something the older man hadn't considered. She wasn't hoping for circumstances to change. She was hoping to survive them with her heart still intact. And watching Theron finally look at her across the glittering expanse of his family's table, his expression raw with longing he couldn't quite conceal, she understood that survival might prove far more difficult than she had imagined, because hope, damn it all, was not something she could control, and it had already begun to kindle, small but persistent, in the spaces between her carefully constructed defenses, threatening to burn everything she had rebuilt to ash. The first week at Ashworth Manor established a pattern that Theron found increasingly unbearable. Mornings began with group breakfasts in the sunny east-facing dining room, where Odessa sat at the opposite end of the long table, engaged in animated conversation with whoever happened to occupy the neighboring seats. She charmed elderly earls with her wit. She impressed young lords with her intelligence. She made Lady Sibylla laugh with observations so quiet they never reached Theron's straining ears. She never looked at him, never acknowledged his presence beyond the barest requirements of courtesy. Afternoons brought organized entertainments designed to showcase the estate's grandeur. Archery competitions on the south lawn, where Merrick stood behind Odessa, adjusting her stance with hands that lingered far too long on her waist and shoulders. Croquet matches where her laughter rang across the manicured grass like bells. Picnics by the ornamental lake, where she somehow always ended up seated beside someone other than him, usually Merrick, always beyond his reach. Evenings were the worst torture. Elaborate dinners followed by drawing room gatherings, cards and conversation and musical performances, and endless opportunities to watch her shine for everyone except him. She played the pianoforte one evening, a skill he hadn't known she possessed, and Merrick stood beside the instrument turning pages, his attention fixed on her profile with naked admiration. She had transformed during their separation. That was what struck him most forcefully. The Odessa he had known 3 years ago had been lovely but uncertain, still finding her voice, still learning to occupy space without apology. This woman commanded attention simply by existing. She spoke with confidence, laughed without self-consciousness, moved through aristocratic society as if she had always belonged there. Bath had not merely healed her, it had forged her into something magnificent. And Merrick was reaping the benefits of that transformation. "You're staring again," Fenwick murmured, appearing at Theron's elbow during yet another interminable evening gathering. "I can practically see the steam rising from your collar. You look like you want to commit murder." "I'm not staring. You've been watching her play cards for the past 40 minutes. You haven't blinked. Your glass has been empty for at least 20 of those minutes. I'm genuinely concerned for your well-being, both physical and mental." Across the drawing room, Odessa sat at a card table with Merrick and 2 other guests, her expression animated as she won yet another hand. Merrick leaned close to murmur something that made her laugh, and Theron's grip on his empty glass tightened until the crystal creaked dangerously. "He's going to propose," Theron said flatly. "Before this house party ends, Merrick is going to ask her to marry him. I can see it in the way he looks at her." "Probably. He'd be a fool not to. She's extraordinary, available, and clearly fond of him." Fenwick paused, his tone carefully neutral. "The question is, what exactly are you planning to do about it?" "What can I do? I'm engaged to her sister. Contracts have been signed. Engagements can be broken. Contracts can be voided under certain circumstances. Not this one." Theron's jaw tightened until it ached. "My grandmother made certain of that. The documents are ironclad, reviewed by 3 different solicitors. The financial arrangements are already in motion. Accounts transferred, debt settled. Breaking the engagement would destroy the Van Thorpe family completely and drag my own name through scandal that would take generations to recover from. So you'll simply watch the woman you love marry another man? Stand by and do nothing while she builds a life with someone else?" The card game ended. Odessa rose, stretching slightly, and Merrick's hand found the small of her back with easy familiarity. They moved toward the refreshment table together, their bodies angled toward each other in a way that suggested intimacy, comfort, the beginnings of real attachment. "I'll do my duty," Theron said, the words tasting like poison. "As I always do, as I was raised to do. Your duty is making you miserable. Anyone can see it. My duty kept her family from ruin. My duty ensures my grandmother's legacy survives. My duty—" "Your duty is a cage you built yourself," Fenwick interrupted quietly, "and you're using it as an excuse to avoid fighting for what you actually want. You're hiding behind obligation because fighting would require courage, and you're terrified of what might happen if you tried and failed." Before Theron could respond, the music from the pianoforte shifted to something softer, more romantic. Couples began gravitating toward an informal dancing space that had been cleared near the windows. Merrick extended his hand to Odessa. She took it with a smile. They began to dance, bodies moving in perfect synchronization, and something inside Theron cracked like ice, breaking on a frozen lake. "Excuse me," he managed, and walked out of the drawing room before he did something unforgivable. The garden was dark and cool, the night air carrying the scent of roses and impending summer rain. Theron walked without direction, letting his feet carry him along familiar paths until he reached the stone bench beside the reflecting pool where his father had once proposed to his mother. He was contemplating his failures when footsteps approached from the darkness. "Running away?" Lisette's voice preceded her appearance, silk rustling as she settled onto the bench beside him uninvited. "How unlike you, Your Grace. I thought you faced all difficulties head-on." "I needed air." The drawing room was stifling. "You needed distance from my sister. Let's not pretend otherwise." Lisette's tone held no accusation, only clinical observation. "You've been watching her all week. Everyone has noticed. The whispers are becoming rather tiresome to manage." Theron turned to look at his betrothed. In the moonlight, Lisette's beauty took on an ethereal quality, all pale skin and silver blonde hair, and eyes that reflected light without any warmth. I apologize if my behavior has caused you embarrassment. Embarrassment is manageable. What concerns me is whether you're planning to honor our agreement. She folded her hands in her lap, her posture perfectly composed. I entered this arrangement with specific expectations. I have held up my end faithfully. I expect you to hold up yours. I intend to. Do you? Because the way you look at Odessa suggests otherwise. The way you can't stay in the same room with her without staring. The way you nearly shattered that glass tonight. Lisette's voice hardened. I was prepared to tolerate a husband who didn't love me. I was not prepared to tolerate one who makes his preference for my sister public knowledge. Lisette, I made sacrifices too, Your Grace. Don't imagine I entered this arrangement without cost. Something flickered across her expression, too quick to identify. Odessa was always the favored one in our household, the creative one, the charming one, the one everyone adored. I simply learned to want different things. And what do you want? She smiled, but it didn't reach her pale eyes. Security, position, the knowledge that my future is assured, regardless of what happens to my family's dwindling fortune. You offered that when you signed those contracts. Don't make me regret accepting. She rose, smoothing her skirts with practiced grace. The midsummer ball is in 5 days. Your grandmother expects us to announce a formal wedding date before the assembled guests. I suggest you compose yourself before then and remember your obligations. She paused, looking down at him, with something that might have been pity or might have been contempt. Some battles cannot be won, Your Grace. The wise know when to stop fighting and accept their circumstances. She walked away into the darkness, leaving Theron alone with the roses and the moonlight, and the growing certainty that wisdom had nothing to do with the choices he had made. And somewhere in the house behind him, Odessa was laughing at something Merrick said, and the sound carried through the open windows like a blade finding its target. Odessa found the letter 3 days before the midsummer ball. She had returned to her room after an exhausting afternoon of lawn games to find an envelope on her pillow, unmarked and sealed with plain wax, rather than any identifying crest. Inside, a single sheet of expensive paper covered in handwriting she recognized instantly, despite not having seen it in months. Her sister's handwriting. Dearest Odessa, I imagine you're wondering why I've chosen to communicate this way, rather than speaking directly. The truth is, there are things I need you to understand that cannot be said aloud. Things about how this arrangement came to be, things I've carried in silence for too long. You believe Theron chose me, that he weighed his options and found me more suitable for his purposes, that your love simply wasn't enough to overcome practical considerations. You're wrong. I chose him. Or rather, I ensured he had no other option available. Do you remember the night before the Harrington ball? When you confided your hopes to me, told me Theron planned to speak with Father, shared every detail of your secret understanding because you trusted me as your sister? I went to the Dowager that same night, told her everything you had shared, offered myself as the alternative before Theron could make his intentions public. She was delighted, of course. A Vanthorpe daughter willing to accept any terms, ask no inconvenient questions, demand no troublesome emotions. I gave her exactly what she wanted, a weapon against her grandson's rebellion. The threats she made were real enough. But they came after I approached her, not before. Theron believes he sacrificed you to protect our family. The truth is, he never had a choice at all because I made certain of that. Why am I telling you this now? Because I've watched you this week, watched you pretend you've moved on, watched you smile at Lord Merrick while your eyes follow Theron across every room. You still love him, and he still loves you, and I find I cannot bear the weight of what I've done any longer. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not certain I deserve it. But you deserve the truth, even if it changes nothing. Do with this knowledge what you will. Your sister, Lisette Odessa, read the letter 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of betrayal. Then she sat on the edge of her bed, hands shaking so violently the paper rattled, trying to process the magnitude of what she had just learned. Lisette had betrayed her deliberately, not out of duty or family loyalty, but out of jealousy, out of a lifetime of feeling second best, out of spite dressed up as practicality. And Theron had never known, had spent 6 months believing he had made a noble sacrifice, when really he had been manipulated into a cage of someone else's design. A knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Odessa?" Sibylla's voice carried through the wood. "Are you coming down for dinner? You'll be late. I need a moment." The door opened anyway. Sibylla took one look at Odessa's face, at the letter clutched in her trembling hands, and crossed the room immediately, concern replacing her usual sardonic expression. "What happened? What is that?" Wordlessly, Odessa handed her the letter. She watched Sibylla read it, watched her expression shift from curiosity to shock, to cold, controlled fury that transformed her elegant features into something almost frightening. That absolute serpent. Sibylla set the letter down with deliberate care, as if touching it might contaminate her. I always suspected Lisette was more calculating than she appeared. But this is extraordinary villainy. This is betrayal of the highest order. She sabotaged everything, from the very beginning. Yes, and then watched you suffer the consequences for 6 months without a single word of confession or remorse. Sibylla's eyes narrowed dangerously. The question is, why confess now? Why reveal this after all these months of silence? Odessa shook her head. I don't know. Guilt, perhaps? Some twisted desire to watch me confront her? Or maybe she simply couldn't resist revealing her own cleverness, proving she had won. Or perhaps she's afraid of something. People don't confess without motivation. Sibylla began pacing, her mind visibly working through possibilities. The midsummer ball is in 3 days, the formal wedding date announcement. If Lisette is confessing now, perhaps she fears something is about to change. Perhaps she sees the way Theron looks at you and worries her victory isn't as secure as she believed. What could possibly change? The engagement is ironclad. Everyone says so. Is it? Sibylla stopped pacing, her gaze sharpening. Contracts can be broken if fraud is proven. If Lisette approached the Dowager before Theron had any chance to act, if she provided information that enabled the manipulation, if the entire arrangement was predicated on deception, the engagement was obtained through fraud. Exactly. Sibylla's smile was sharp enough to cut. The question is what you intend to do with this knowledge. Burn it and move on with Merrick, or use it to fight for what was stolen from you? Odessa looked down at the letter in her lap, her sister's confession, her potential weapon. I need to think, she whispered. I need time to process this. Don't take too long. 3 days isn't much time, and some opportunities don't wait forever. The library at Ashworth Manor was empty at midnight, or so Odessa had assumed. She had counted on solitude, had waited until the house fell silent and the last footsteps faded from the corridors, had slipped through shadowed hallways without encountering anyone who might question her presence or report her movements to the Dowager. She needed to think, needed the comfort of books and quiet and the particular peace that came from being surrounded by centuries of accumulated wisdom. The library had always been her sanctuary, even in unfamiliar houses. What she hadn't counted on was finding Theron already there. He stood by the tall window, silhouetted against the moonlight, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The fire had burned low in the grate, casting warm shadows across leather chairs and countless book spines. The room smelled of wood smoke and old paper, and something that was distinctly him. He turned at the sound of the door opening, and for a long moment they simply stared at each other across the darkened room, neither speaking, neither moving. "I'll leave," Odessa said, already stepping backward. "I didn't realize anyone was here." "Stay." The words stopped her retreat. Not a command, a request, almost a plea. "Theron, please." He set down his glass on a nearby table, running a hand through already disheveled hair. "I've been trying to speak with you alone for an entire week. Every time I approach, you disappear into a crowd. Every time I think I've found a private moment, Merrick materializes like a very polite guardian angel. Perhaps I don't want to speak with you." "I know." He laughed, but it held no humor, only exhaustion and something that sounded like despair. "I know you don't. I know I have no right to ask for anything from you after what I did. I know." He stopped, pressing his palms against his eyes. "God, Odessa. I know everything I did wrong. It plays on a loop in my head every night. Every moment I could have chosen differently. Every word I should have said. Every path I should have taken. She should leave." Every rational instinct screamed at her to walk away before this conversation went somewhere neither of them could return from. Instead, she closed the door behind her. "Your grandmother told me to be cautious of you," she said quietly. "Lord Hadrian told me to guard myself against hope. Even Sibylla, who normally thinks caution is for cowards, suggested I protect what remains of my heart. They're right. You should protect yourself from me. Then give me a reason to. Tell me why you did it. Not the noble version you presented 6 months ago. The real reason, the full truth, with nothing held back." Theron was silent for a long moment, staring into the dying fire. When he spoke, his voice was raw with emotions he had clearly been suppressing for months. "My grandmother showed me letters. Documentation of your father's debts in detail I hadn't known existed. Proof that without significant intervention, your family would lose everything within a year. The house, the remaining investments, everything your mother had managed to salvage. I knew about the debts. Everyone did. Did you know the Dowager had the power to make them disappear, or to accelerate them into immediate catastrophe?" He turned to face her fully, and the anguish in his expression made her breath catch. She offered a choice. Marry Lisette, accept her as my Duchess, and the debts would be quietly resolved. Your family would be protected indefinitely. Your father would never know how close he came to complete ruin. Or refuse, and watch everything collapse around the people I claimed to love. Watch your parents lose their home. Watch your brother's prospects evaporate. Watch you suffer for what she called my selfishness. So you chose to break my heart to protect my family. I chose to break my own heart believing I was protecting yours." His voice cracked on the words. "I convinced myself it was sacrifice. Noble sacrifice. The kind of thing a good man does when he can't have what he wants without destroying others. And now? What do you believe now?" He crossed the room, stopping just close enough that she could see every line of anguish carved into his face by sleepless nights. "Now I understand I was a coward. I let my grandmother manipulate me instead of fighting back. I let fear make my decisions, because fighting would have been hard and uncertain and terrifying. I told myself I was protecting you, but really I was protecting myself from the pain of watching things get difficult." Odessa's throat tightened. "Why are you telling me this now? What purpose does it serve?" "Because you deserve to know the truth, because watching you with Merrick is destroying me. And I needed you to understand why I'm barely functioning before you choose him. Because—" He stopped, his hand reaching toward her face before falling back to his side. "Because I love you. I have loved you since the moment you emerged from that rose bush with scratches on your arms and a kitten in your hands. And I will love you until I stop breathing and probably beyond. Theron, I know it doesn't change anything concrete. I know I'm still bound to your sister by contracts and obligations. I know I've made choices that have consequences I can't escape. But I couldn't let you believe for one more day that I stopped loving you, that I chose Lisette because I wanted her, that you were somehow insufficient. He stepped back, creating distance between them that felt like miles. You were never insufficient, Odessa. You were everything. You still are. She should tell him about Lisette's letter, should reveal the truth about how the engagement really came to be, the manipulation and betrayal that had trapped them both. But something held her back. Some need to understand more before she offered information that could change everything. What would you do differently? She asked instead. If you could go back to that day in my father's library. I would have told my grandmother to destroy whatever she wanted. I would have let the debts bury your family and trusted that we could rebuild together. I would have chosen you over everything else, and damn the consequences. His voice dropped to a whisper. I would have been brave enough to deserve you. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and pain. 3 days until the midsummer ball, Odessa finally said. 3 days until you announce a wedding date to my sister. Yes. And you'll go through with it, despite everything you've just said? The question hung in the air. Theron's expression shifted through emotions too complex to name. Tell me not to, he said quietly. Give me a reason to fight. Give me something to hope for, and I will tear down everything my grandmother has built to earn another chance with you. Odessa thought of Lisette's letter, of the truth she carried, of the power she held to change everything with a few words. She thought of 6 months of pain, of rebuilding herself from wreckage, of learning to breathe without him. She thought of Caius Merrick, steady and kind, and offering a future without complications. And she thought of standing in this library 3 years ago, falling in love with a man who deliberately misquoted Shakespeare just to make her smile. I can't tell you what to do, she said finally. I've spent 6 months trying to stop loving you, trying to move forward with my life, trying to become someone who doesn't need you. She met his eyes. I failed. Completely. Utterly failed. But that doesn't mean I know what comes next. Hope kindled in his expression, fragile, uncertain hope. Then we figure it out together. Whatever obstacles exist, whatever contracts my grandmother has constructed, whatever consequences we face, we figure it out together, if you'll let me try. She should say no, should protect herself, should remember all the reasons this was impossible. Instead, she crossed the remaining distance between them and took his hand. Together, she whispered. And in the darkness of the library, surrounded by centuries of Ashworth history and the lingering scent of wood smoke and old books, something that had been broken for 6 long months began to heal. 2 days before the midsummer ball, Theron found Odessa in the rose garden at dawn. She hadn't been able to sleep after their conversation in the library, had spent hours staring at her ceiling, replaying every word, trying to determine whether she had made the right choice or simply the inevitable one, whether hope was wisdom or foolishness, whether she was walking toward happiness or heartbreak. He looked as sleepless as she felt, dark circles beneath his blue eyes, clothes slightly rumpled, as if he had dressed hastily without consulting a mirror. But his expression when he saw her held something she hadn't witnessed in 6 months. Joy. Simple, uncomplicated joy at her existence. I've been thinking all night, he said without preamble, falling into step beside her among the roses. About contracts, about obligations, about the things my grandmother holds over everyone in this family. And what conclusions have you reached? That she holds power because people let her, because we've all agreed to play by her rules without questioning whether those rules are fair or even legally enforceable. He stopped walking, turning to face her among the blooming flowers. I spent yesterday evening reviewing the engagement contracts with my personal solicitor, quietly, without my grandmother's knowledge. Odessa's heart accelerated. And what did you discover? There are contingencies built into the documents, clauses that would allow termination under specific circumstances. He paused, something fierce kindling in his expression. Fraud, for instance. If either party entered the arrangement based on false information or deliberate deception, the entire contract becomes voidable. Lisette's letter burned in Odessa's mind like a brand, the confession she still hadn't shared. What kind of false information would qualify? That's what I'm trying to determine precisely. My grandmother presented certain facts when she pressured me into this engagement. Certain threats, certain claims about how the arrangement came to be. If those facts were fabricated or manipulated. He trailed off, studying her expression with sudden intensity. You know something. I can see it in your face. What makes you say that? Because you haven't looked surprised once during this entire conversation. Because you're asking questions like someone who already knows the answers. He stepped closer, urgency in every line of his body. Odessa, what do you know? She reached into her pocket and withdrew Lisette's letter, handed it to him without a word. She watched him read it, watched his expression shift from confusion to disbelief, to cold, crystalline rage that transformed his features into something almost frightening. She planned this. His voice was barely audible. From the very beginning. Before I even knew there was danger, she wanted what I had, and she found a way to take it. Theron looked up from the letter, his eyes blazing with fury. This changes everything. If Lisette approached my grandmother before I had any chance to act, if she provided the information that enabled the manipulation, if the entire engagement was predicated on her deliberate deception, the engagement was obtained through fraud. Yes. He gripped the letter like a weapon. Yes, it absolutely was. What will you do with this knowledge? Confront my grandmother immediately. Show her this letter. Demand she release me from a contract that was built on lies. He paused, something shifting in his expression. But first? He crossed the remaining distance between them. His hands cupped her face with devastating gentleness. First, I need to know this is real. That you're choosing me as deliberately as Lisette chose to separate us. That when the chaos descends, and it will descend like a storm, you'll still be here beside me. Theron, tell me to stop, and I will. Tell me this is too fast, too complicated, too dangerous, and I'll step back. I'll fight for you regardless. But I need to know. His voice cracked with emotion. I need to know I'm not alone in this battle. She answered by closing the distance between them. The kiss was nothing like their first, years ago in a moonlit garden, soft and exploratory and full of innocent hope. This was something fiercer, more desperate. Two people who had been separated by lies and manipulation finally finding each other again, despite everything working against them. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close until no space remained between them. She tangled her fingers in his hair. The world narrowed to the warmth of his mouth, the strength of his embrace, the way her heart sang with recognition after months of silence. This was what she had been missing for 6 endless months. This was what Bath had never truly healed. This was the piece of herself she had left behind when she walked out of the Vanthorpe Library. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. Together, he repeated, whatever comes. Together. He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. The cold, controlled Duke she had seen at the Montclair ball vanished completely, replaced by the man she had fallen in love with. Open. Vulnerable. Hers. I should warn you, he said, My grandmother will not surrender her plans easily, and your sister has proven herself capable of considerable manipulation. I know. The scandal will be extraordinary. Every gossip in London will feast on this story for months. Years, possibly. I know. And there's still Merrick to consider. He's been nothing but honorable toward you. He doesn't deserve to be hurt. Theron. She placed a finger against his lips, silencing his concerns. I know all of it. I've spent 6 months preparing myself for battles. I thought I'd never get the chance to fight. I'm ready for whatever comes. He kissed her finger, then her palm, then her wrist. God, I love you. Prove it. End this fraudulent engagement. Choose me in front of everyone. Make it so public and so undeniable that even your grandmother can't undo it. Something fierce ignited in his expression. The midsummer ball. The midsummer ball, she agreed. Where everyone is expecting a wedding announcement. Give them something different, something real. Give them us. Give them the truth. He kissed her again, sealing the promise with his lips, and his hands, and his whole being. And in the rose garden at dawn, with the first light painting the sky in shades of gold and amber, the Duke of Ravenmore chose love over duty. Finally. Irrevocably. Completely. The day before the midsummer ball, everything carefully constructed came crashing down. Odessa was dressing for dinner when Lisette appeared in her doorway without warning, her expression eerily calm despite the violence simmering beneath her composed surface. I wondered how long it would take, Lisette said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her with a soft click. I assumed you'd run to Theron immediately after reading my letter. You always were hopelessly sentimental about such things. You admit what you did then. No denials. No excuses. I admitted it in writing, didn't I? Seemed rather pointless to deny it now, when the evidence exists in your possession. Lisette moved to the window, gazing out at the grounds with detached interest. Though I am curious what you think will happen next, what grand plan you've concocted. Theron is going to end the engagement. He has legal grounds now that fraud has been established. Does he? Lisette turned, her smile sharp as broken glass. And you believe the Dowager will simply accept that humiliation? Step aside gracefully? Allow her grandson to embarrass her in front of everyone she spent decades cultivating? She'll have no choice once the truth is revealed. There's always a choice, dear sister. Lisette's voice dropped to something colder, more dangerous. While you've been playing Romeo and Juliet in the rose garden, I've been having conversations of my own, with the Dowager, with certain solicitors who understand how power actually works in this world, with people who have far more to lose than you realize. Dread coiled in Odessa's stomach like a living thing. What have you done? I've ensured my position remains secure. Did you really think I would confess without having a contingency plan firmly in place? Lisette laughed softly. The letter was bait, Odessa. I needed to know how far you'd take this foolish rebellion, whether you'd actually try to destroy everything I've built for myself. You built nothing. You stole it through manipulation and lies. Semantics. The result is the same. Lisette moved closer, her pale eyes glittering with something that might have been madness or might have been triumph. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow at the midsummer ball, the Dowager will announce not just a wedding date, but an immediate wedding ceremony. A special license has already been obtained and signed. By midnight tomorrow, I will be the Duchess of Ravenmore, and nothing you or Theron do will change that. He'll never agree to such a thing. He won't have a choice. The Dowager holds documents that could destroy your family far more thoroughly than the original threats ever could. Not just debts this time. Evidence of your father's involvement in certain questionable business dealings during his time in India. The kind of evidence that could see him imprisoned rather than simply impoverished. Ice flooded Odessa's veins. You're lying. Father would never, wouldn't he? Ask yourself how a man builds a fortune from nothing in a foreign land. Ask yourself what compromises might have been necessary. Ask yourself whether ignorance is truly the same as innocence. Lisette's smile widened. The Dowager has been very thorough in her research. She doesn't make threats she can't back up with evidence. This is monstrous, even for you. This is survival. Something you've never had to learn because everyone always loved you best. The pretty one, the charming one, the one who got everything she wanted without trying while I fought for scraps of attention. Lisette's composure cracked slightly, revealing the genuine bitterness beneath. I've spent my entire life being second best to you, Odessa. The less pretty sister. The less interesting one. The one people overlooked or forgot. Now I have something you want, and I intend to keep it regardless of the cost. Theron doesn't want you. He's never wanted you. I don't need him to want me. I need him to marry me. Everything else is negotiable. Lisette moved toward the door. You have until tomorrow evening to decide. Disappear quietly. Let the wedding proceed without interference, and your family remains untouched. Continue this foolish rebellion, and watch everything you love burn to ashes. She departed without another word, leaving Odessa alone with the shattered remains of her hope. 3 hours later, Odessa found Theron in his study, already aware that something catastrophic had occurred. My grandmother summoned me this afternoon, he said, before she could speak, his face pale and drawn. She knows about the rose garden, about our plans to expose the fraud, about everything. Lisette! Lisette! He slammed his hand against the desk, fury radiating from every line of his body. She's been playing us from the very beginning. The confession, the letter, all of it designed to draw us out of hiding, to identify the threat so she could neutralize it before we could act. Odessa sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted beyond words. She said there's evidence against my father, something that could see him imprisoned in disgrace. There is. Theron's voice was hollow. My grandmother showed me the documents. Years ago, your father was involved in a business arrangement in India that skirted the edges of legality. Nothing that seemed serious at the time, but in the hands of the right prosecutor, with the right motivation and the right connections. So we're trapped, completely and utterly trapped. I'm trying to find another way. There has to be something we haven't considered, some leverage we can use. There isn't. The words tasted like ash on her tongue. Don't you see? This was always their game. We were playing by rules they created, thinking we could win. But they made the rules. They control every piece on the board. I won't accept that. I refuse to accept defeat. You might have to. Odessa stood, crossing to where he stood by the window. My father's freedom versus our happiness. My family's survival versus our love. They've made it impossible to choose both. That's the whole point of their strategy. Then I'll find a way to give you both outcomes. He gripped her shoulders, his eyes fierce with determination. I am not losing you again. I don't care what it costs me. Even if the cost is my father's imprisonment? He hesitated, just for a moment. Just long enough for the truth to become painfully clear. You can't promise that, Odessa whispered, tears beginning to fall despite her efforts to prevent them. You can't sacrifice my family for me. I won't let you carry that burden. Odessa, this was a beautiful dream. She touched his face, memorizing the feel of his skin beneath her fingers. But it's time to wake up and face reality. She pulled away from him, walked toward the door on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Don't do this, his voice cracked like splitting wood. Please, we can find another way. We just need more time to think. There is no more time. She turned, memorizing his face one last time. tomorrow, you marry my sister, and I disappear forever. That's how this story ends. It doesn't have to end this way. It does. She opened the door. Goodbye, Theron. For real this time. She walked away, and this time, she didn't let herself look back. The morning of the midsummer ball dawned gray and threatening rain. Odessa had packed her bags in the darkness of her room, moving quietly to avoid alerting the servants. She would leave before the festivities began, disappear back to London, then perhaps abroad. Somewhere far enough that she wouldn't have to hear about the new Duchess of Ravenmore. She was securing the last trunk when a knock came at her door. Miss Vanthorpe? An unfamiliar voice. A message for you, miss. She opened the door to find a young footman holding a sealed envelope. He bowed, handed it over, and retreated before she could ask questions. The seal was the Ashworth crest, but the handwriting was not Theron's. It was the Dowager's. Miss Vanthorpe, you believe yourself defeated. You believe there is no path forward that does not require impossible sacrifice. You believe my grandson must choose between you and his duty. You are wrong on all counts. Come to my private study. 1 hour before the ball begins, alone. There are truths you do not yet possess, and I find myself, against all expectation, willing to share them. Odessa read the letter 3 times, searching for hidden traps, concealed threats, any indication of what the Dowager could possibly want. She found nothing. Only the impossible suggestion that the woman who had orchestrated everything might be offering something other than destruction. 1 hour before the ball, she stood outside the Dowager's private study, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knocked. Enter. The Dowager sat beside a fire that burned despite the summer warmth, wrapped in a dark shawl that made her look somehow smaller than her usual imposing presence, older, more human. She gestured to a chair across from her. Sit. We haven't much time, and there is much to discuss. Why am I here? What game is this? No game, not anymore. The Dowager's voice held unexpected weariness. You're here because I underestimated you badly, and because my grandson reminded me of something I had forgotten decades ago. What did he remind you of? That I was once in love with a man my family considered entirely unsuitable. The Dowager's gaze drifted to the fire, seeing something far away. He was a second son with no fortune and fewer prospects. My father threatened to disown me. My mother wept for weeks. Everyone assured me I would ruin myself and the family name. Odessa stayed silent, afraid to break whatever spell had prompted this unexpected confession. I married someone else, the appropriate choice, the sensible choice. I was Duchess of Ravenmore for 40 years, she paused, and I was never once truly happy in that role. Why are you telling me this? Because Lisette came to me this morning, triumphant, certain she had won everything. She showed me exactly who she really is beneath that perfect facade, and it was not the biddable, compliant wife I thought I was securing for my grandson. The Dowager's expression hardened. I made a tactical error of enormous proportions. I was so focused on preventing Theron from making what I perceived as my mistake that I pushed him toward something far worse. The evidence against my father is genuine, but limited in its usefulness. The prosecutor Lisette threatened you with is my cousin's son. He will pursue nothing without my explicit approval. She paused meaningfully. Which he will not receive. Ever. Odessa's pulse quickened. You're saying, I'm saying I was wrong. The words seemed to cost her something precious. About you. About what my grandson needed. About what duty actually requires. She rose, moving to a desk drawer. I'm also saying that Lisette's position is considerably weaker than she currently believes. She withdrew a document and handed it to Odessa, the engagement contract, with a clause Lisette never knew existed. My late husband insisted on including it, for reasons I never understood until now. A provision allowing immediate termination if either party enters under false pretenses, even if those pretenses were engineered by a third party. Lisette engineered the entire arrangement through deliberate deception. Yes, and I have her confession in writing because she was foolish enough to put it in a letter, thinking it would give her power over you. The dowager's smile was thin but genuine. Instead, it gave me everything I needed to end this farce. Odessa stared at the dowager, struggling to reconcile this woman with the enemy she had imagined for 6 months. Why help us now? You fought so hard against this match. Because I've watched my grandson this week. Really watched him for the first time in months. The way he looks at you. The way he comes alive in your presence. The dowager's voice softened fractionally. He reminds me of myself. Before I let fear and duty make my choices for me. I will not watch him make the same mistake I did. What do you want me to do? Go to the ball. Find Theron before the announcement. Tell him the engagement is void. She moved toward the door. And Miss Vanthorpe, when you marry my grandson, and you will marry him, remember this moment. Remember that I am capable of recognizing my errors. It may prove useful knowledge in the years to come. She glided from the room, leaving Odessa holding the document that changed everything. The midsummer ball blazed with 10,000 candles. Odessa descended the grand staircase in a gown of midnight blue, the dowager's document secured in a hidden pocket against her heart. Below, hundreds of guests mingled in their finest attire, anticipation humming through the crowd like electricity before a summer storm. Everyone knew something significant was coming. The dowager had announced that the evening would include a special declaration. The speculation ran from wedding dates to political announcements to scandal of unprecedented proportions. They had no idea how right they were. Odessa found Theron near the orchestra, his expression that of a man facing his own execution. Lisette stood beside him in triumphant bridal white, her smile radiant with victory, her hand possessively gripping his arm. Their eyes met across the glittering ballroom. Theron's expression transformed. Hope, disbelief, desperate question. Odessa smiled and nodded. The music stopped abruptly. The dowager stepped onto the raised platform at the far end of the ballroom, commanding instant attention with her presence alone. Distinguished guests, tonight, I have several important announcements to make regarding the future of the Ashworth family. Lisette's smile widened. Her grip on Theron's arm tightened. First, I must acknowledge a grave error in judgment. The dowager's voice carried clearly through the silent room. 6 months ago, I pressured my grandson into an engagement I believed served our family's interests. I was wrong. Murmurs rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Lisette's expression froze. The engagement between my grandson, Theron Ashworth, Duke of Ravenmore, and Miss Lisette Vanthorpe is hereby terminated, effective immediately. The murmurs exploded into shocked exclamations. Lisette's face went white as snow. No. Her voice cut through the chaos. You can't do this. The contract is binding. The contract was obtained through fraud. Your fraud, Miss Vanthorpe. The dowager's tone turned to ice. I have documentation proving you engineered this entire arrangement through deliberate deception. The contract is void. Odessa watched her sister's carefully constructed world collapse in real time. Part of her wanted to feel satisfaction, even triumph. Instead, she felt only weary sadness for the desperate jealousy that had driven Lisette to such extremes. You have no proof. I have your letter, the one you wrote confessing everything. Odessa stepped forward, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. The one you thought would give you power over me, the one that destroyed you instead. Lisette spun to face her, eyes blazing with fury. You did this. You always do this. Take everything I want. You had everything that mattered, Odessa said quietly. A family who loved you. a sister who would have supported you in any legitimate pursuit. You chose to destroy instead of build. That's not my fault. It never was." The silence stretched, heavy with judgment and revelation. Then Theron moved. He crossed the ballroom with deliberate purpose, every eye tracking his progress. He stopped before Odessa, and the love in his expression stopped her heart entirely. "I should have done this 6 months ago," he said, his voice pitched to Carrie. "I should have chosen love over fear, courage over duty, you over everything else." He dropped to one knee. The ballroom collectively gasped. "Odessa Vanthorpe, I have loved you since a moonlit garden and a rescued kitten. I have loved you through my own cowardice, through 6 months of separation, through every obstacle placed in our path. I will love you until my last breath and far beyond." Tears streamed down her face. She didn't care who saw. "Will you marry me? Not because of contracts or arrangements or duty. Because I choose you. Only you. Forever." She pulled him to his feet and kissed him in front of 500 witnesses. "Yes," she whispered against his lips, "with everything I am and everything I hope to become. Yes." The ballroom erupted in applause and shocked exclamations, and the particular buzz of scandal being born. But Odessa heard none of it. She heard only her heart, finally whole again. 6 months later, the new Duchess of Ravenmore stood in the rose garden at Ashworth Manor, watching the sunset paint the sky in burnished gold and amber. The exact shades of her gown from the night everything changed. The wedding had been small, intimate, exactly what they wanted. No spectacle. No society parade. Just family and friends who mattered, gathered to witness 2 people finally claiming the happiness they had nearly lost. Lisette had disappeared to the continent after the midsummer ball, her reputation too tattered to remain. Odessa had received one letter, months later, containing only 2 words. "I understand. Perhaps someday they would find their way back to sisterhood. Perhaps the wounds were too deep. Time would tell." The dowager had surprised everyone by embracing her new granddaughter-in-law with something approaching warmth. "This family needed fire," she had said at the wedding breakfast. "We had grown too comfortable in our cold." Lord Merrick had attended as a guest, his congratulations genuine, his own engagement to a lovely widow announced shortly after. Some hearts were resilient enough to find happiness twice. "You're thinking too loudly," Theron said, appearing beside her with silent grace. His arms wrapped around her from behind, drawing her against his chest with familiar ease. "I'm thinking about how different everything is, how different I am." "Different how?" 6 months ago, I believed happiness was something that happened to other people, something I had lost and would never recover." She turned in his embrace. "Now I'm standing in a rose garden with my husband, wondering what I did to deserve this. You survived." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You rebuilt yourself from wreckage. You faced every obstacle with courage I could only admire. I fell asleep crying for 3 months, and then you stopped crying. That's the point." His hands cupped her face. "You didn't give up, even when everything suggested you should." "Neither did you, eventually." He laughed, free and genuine. "Eventually. After considerable intervention from my grandmother, of all people. She's not so terrible once you get past the intimidation. High praise from the woman she once threatened to destroy." Odessa smiled, leaning into his warmth. "We should go inside. Dinner will be ready." "In a moment." He held her closer. "I want to remember this exact moment. Everything we almost lost." She kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. "I love you," she whispered. "I loved you when I thought I had lost you forever. I will love you for every moment we have. As will I." They stood together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in colors that matched the night he first saw her dancing with another man and realized what he had thrown away. Some stories start with happy accidents. Theirs started with betrayal and heartbreak, but it ended here, in a rose garden at sunset, with two people who had fought through everything to claim the love they deserved. And that ending was worth every moment of pain that preceded it. Thank you for being here. If you found yourself captivated by Odessa and Theron's journey, if your heart broke and mended alongside theirs, consider subscribing for more tales of love that conquers all. Every story exists because you're here to experience it. Until next time, remember, the greatest love stories aren't the ones that come easily. They're the ones worth fighting for.